Luther Adams is an American composer and author. He was awarded the Pulitzer Prize for Music and a Grammy Award for his orchestral composition, Become Ocean, which was premiered by the Seattle Symphony Orchestra in 2013. He is also the author of Winter Music, Composing the North, and The Place Where You Go to Listen, In Search of Ecology of Music. We are so delighted to have John here this evening to talk about his memoir, Silence is So Deep, Music, Solitude, Alaska. And now I'd like to turn it over to our own Seattle Symphony conductor, Ludovic Morleau, a friend of John's, to offer a welcome. Please note that due to a medical emergency, Barry Lopez, who was originally scheduled to be in conversation with John tonight, is unable to join the program. He is in stable condition, and we are wishing him well as he continues to recover. John has asked another good friend, Karen Michel of WNYC Public Radio, to be in conversation with him tonight. For now, here is Ludovic Morleau.
Hello, everyone. My name is Ludovic Morleau, and I'm the conductor emeritus with the Seattle Symphony. I'd like to welcome you here today for this wonderful event in company of John Luther Adams and Barry Lopez. Back a few years in 2013, as music director of the Seattle Symphony, I had the privilege to collaborate with John on a very important project for him, as it was the first composition that he did for big symphony orchestra, but also for the Seattle Symphony, because our recording of that piece would win us a gramophone award, which we cherish the collaboration with John since very, very much, having performed some of his other pieces like Become Desert and Become River and more. So I couldn't stay away from be on camera for 2 minutes to welcome John for this event today. And I received recently in the post his later book, Silence is So Deep, which I'm sure John will be speaking about today, and such a moving journey back in Alaska, but also a real intake in how you can understand his music and where he's coming from with his music making. Therefore, I'd like to really take this opportunity to thank John for all those wonderful projects we've been able to share at the Seattle Symphony, and to welcome him alongside Barry Lopez for this wonderful event. Thank you very much.
Hello, everyone. It's wonderful to see you virtually all over the continent. From Vashon Island to Todos Santos. Silence is So Deep is dedicated to my wife, Cynthia, and to my dear friends, the late Gordon Wright and the late John Haynes. As Ludo has said, tonight's event was originally planned as a conversation with another dear friend who has influenced my life and work as deeply as anyone, Barry Lopez. For almost 40 years now, Barry and I have shared the sense that we're doing the same work in different disciplines. Barry's work as a writer, like my work as a composer, is usually solitary. And for most of our friendship, we've been hundreds, if not thousands, of miles apart. But just knowing that Barry is in his studio doing his work makes my solitary work in my studio feel a little less lonely. Over the years, that feeling of shared solitude and purpose has only deepened, as has Barry's and my sense of kinship with so many other artists and scientists, bearers of indigenous traditions, and the most generous-spirited of religious and philosophical thinkers, as well as this larger awareness of belonging to a community that encompasses not only past and future generations of Homo sapiens, but also the larger than human community of life on Earth. Barry can't be with us this evening because he's recovering from emergency surgery. We've been in touch today, and I'm very pleased to report that he's back at home, resting well. He sends his respects to everyone, and I'd like to dedicate this conversation in his honor. At the last minute, another dear friend, Karen Michel, has generously agreed to step in for Barry. You may well know Karen from her singular work with National Public Radio. Like all my favorite people, Karen lives deeply, broadly, and fiercely. Karen and I have known one another for years, since we were neighbors in the woods outside Fairbanks. So she knows many of the people and places that I write about in my memoir. And as you'll soon discover, she is also a brilliant conversationalist. So I'd like to say hello, Karen.
Hey,
It's
John.
lovely to see you.
Good to see you. Cheers.
Right back at you.
All right. And cheers also to Barry and his recovery.
To Barry.
And also to all of you out there, wherever you may be, please join us if you will. We're drinking, let's see, an Italian red on John's part, a Portuguese on mine. Take whatever you will. And so, John, we agreed that we're really going to focus on the book, Silence is So Deep. And there's a question already about will you be hearing any music? Not unless we start humming, and trust me, you don't want me to do that, maybe John. So since this is a memoir, I'm curious, do you read other people's memoirs?
Not many. In fact, when this whole thing started, when the critic Alex Ross and I were walking at night across frozen Lake Louise on the south slope of the Alaska Range. And Alex, in his gentle, quiet way, just asked me, John, have you ever thought of writing a memoir? And my response was, well, no. I mean, I wasn't even sure what a memoir was. But to the extent I understood it, I thought, well, these are books that are written by rock stars or politicians or distinguished Nobel physicists at the end of a long career. And since I didn't fit any of those descriptions, I thought, no. But the idea stuck with me. And, over time, it wouldn't go away. And I've read a few memoirs along the way, but I really prefer biographies.
Mm.
I just read a big fat biography of the man who, perhaps more than any other, shaped the direction of my life's work, Henry David Thoreau.
Mm-hmm.
A big fat bio of Thoreau by Laura Walls, which I would highly recommend.
Okay. Because one of the reasons I ask is that this doesn't read so much like a memoir as your reflections on what you felt like reflecting on. It's kind of more anecdotal. It's Does that make some sense? Okay.
Yeah, it does. I like stories, it turns out. And as Barry has said to me, when I've expressed my insecurity about writing, he said, John, you have stories to tell and the words to tell them. So I don't know whether it's actually a memoir or not, but there's some stories in it.
But what for you is the relationship between text and music, between the sound of a word on the page? Is that key to you?
Absolutely, Karen. Yes. Yeah. I won't publish anything, even an essay, unless I read it out loud. Okay. It has to sound as language. It's not enough to look good, to be impressive on the page. I'm much more interested in how the words flow, how they resonate, the music of the words.
Yeah. Okay. That makes sense. It does, because you're very careful about the words you choose, which I, as a person who writes, totally respect. And there is a cadence to the way you write. Just as much of your music uses polyrhythms and change-ups. I mean, you're going this way and then something else happens to you.
Yes.
We will be talking about, I think. But you don't know. You do that in text also. You tend to do that.
Interesting.
And then there's this swelling of something else. And the other thing I noticed listening to a lot of your music lately is that you tie things up at the beginning and at the end. And you do that very consciously in this book.
Yeah, that may be I don't know why that is, but this book is different. You know, I've written 2 books before,
Right.
and the difference in this book is that I don't feel it. The other books just grew. I stand by winter music and the place where you go to listen. Um, uh, they're good reads, and they grew, but they grew very naturally out of my work, out of the process of working. Um, for much of my life, the writing has been about the music, and as Barnett Newman, the great painter, said, you know, an artist sometimes writes so that he'll have something to read, and that was that was how I felt about my writing. I wrote to try and understand what the music wanted of me. Um, Sometimes before the fact, sometimes during the course of working on a large piece, for instance, the place where you go to listen, sometimes reflecting on a piece after it was finished and just trying to figure out, well, what was that all about? How did that work and why? So Silence is So Deep is the first time that I thought, well, okay, I'll sit down and we'll conceive this as a book from the get-go. The first 2 books grew out of the work. They're short essays, they're anecdotes, they're journals. But Silence is So Deep, I thought, okay, I'm going to write this as one story, not as a bunch of incidents. And I'm pleased to hear that for you, the language somewhat resembles the music. And I owe that to the brains and the good looks of my immediate family. Cynthia, one night a couple of years ago, and I was struggling with the manuscript of this book, and she listened and then took a breath and very quietly, gently said, "You know, John, I wonder if the writing could be as beautiful as the music." And of course, I said, "Well, no way." But she got me thinking the way Alex Ross had, and I'm not sure that the language is there, but it really informed my approach to writing.
Well, it's interesting in itself that you use the word beauty, that you don't run from it. I mean, you in the book talk about the kind of abandoning, in effect, music school, the music composition world,
Yeah.
because it was constraining and it had certain notions of what you were supposed to do.
Yes.
And there was, at the time that you were in school, right? Beauty was not a good thing.
No, it was out of fashion.
Right. I mean, I was a studio art major when you were a music composition major, okay? And beauty was not good. I mean, ugly was good, funky was good, right?
Yeah.
That was good. But yet you transcended that, let's use a fancy word here, and you go for beauty. You go for rigorous composition. I'm going to just tell folks here that I asked John today if he could send me some of his scores. I wanted to look at them. And I just want to see if I can, if I still have this Become Ocean score up here. And in the place where usually a tempo is written, right? You have for Become Ocean, inexorable. I have never seen that before. You have for Become River, it's flowing. For Become Ocean, it's inexorable, which is another word for unrelenting, right?
Yes.
Okay. So your music is kind of unrelenting. I mean, I don't mean that in a bad way, but we'll get there, perhaps, but we'll see. And I don't even remember where we're going with this, except beauty. Right, that's where we were.
Yeah, you know, back when we were kids, when we were students in the 70s, let's say, especially in the world of so-called classical music or contemporary art music or whatever you want to call that stuff, there was this idea that music had to be smart, but somehow it couldn't be beautiful at the same time, and that struck me as just patently ridiculous. I've never understood why we can't have our cake and eat it too. So I make music that is, I hope, rigorously conceived and meticulously constructed. I mean, a lot of my work is frankly algorithmic. I mean, it's extremely mathematical, and yet at the same time, I hope that you don't need to know any of that. All you need to do is hear the sound. If you choose to dig deeper and explore how the music is put together, fine. But that's not what music is about for me. And yet I think the intellectual, the formal rigor of construction gives the music a kind of inexorable quality, a kind of inevitability, a feeling of a natural force that you hear, that you feel, that you sense, even if you're not aware of exactly what's going on.
Okay, so that's the visceral quality.
Yeah.
Okay, because that as you inform us is important for you as well. So how does this tie into your background as a rock and roll drummer?
I think it grows right out of it. And nothing pleases me more than when people in pop music, or Glenn Cauchy from Wilco, or Tom York from Radiohead, or who knew Taylor Swift, bless her heart. They listen to this music, and I've scratched my bald pate and wondered, well, what's that about? And then finally, a young friend, I asked a question. I asked that question to a young friend. Well, what is it that people, younger people, are hearing in the music? And he said it's the physicality. It's the sensuous nature of the music.
I want to talk about that, because today when I was listening, and I'm not going to cite which of the many pieces I listened to today in the last few weeks, for that matter, I started dancing. Okay, I literally got up and started dancing. And so then I remember, and correct me if I'm misremembering, because the brain is a little fuzzy. And I want to get to Become Ocean for a second here. John Cage did a composition called Ocean in the early 1990s, right? And later he did it for Merce Cunningham, his partner, for one of the dances. And as we know, of course, Merce did not dance to music. They were independent entities, as was what he called the decor, the scenes. So it made me wonder if you had ever considered, and I was thinking of Mark Morris, because Mark Morris's choreography is so tied to the music, unlike Merce Cunningham's. If you have ever considered composing music for dance.
It seems to happen accidentally. My sixth string quartet is co-commissioned of Black Mountain College, where my mentors, Lou Harrison and John Cage and Merce Cunningham, and all my art heroes were in residence back in the 40s and the 50s. But it's also co-commissioned by Liz Gehring Dance. Liz Gehring, a brilliant choreographer, and she is doing. It's a big piece, it's I think 6 movements, and it's a whole evening, and she is doing a dance to the music. I've never gone the other way around. It's funny you mentioned Mark Morris, because not only do I think he's an unmitigated genius, he's also a dear friend.
Oh, really?
We've become really, really close.
Right.
And we're so close that we say we will never work together because we love one another too much. But Mark is so good, and he is so he's a musician himself. And as you say, everything he does begins from the music. And he reads musical notation, he plays, he conducts, he understands. I would be very happy to give Mark a piece of music and say, whatever you want. In fact, I'd prefer that.
Okay. Now let's get back to the book.
Okay.
We're going. This is a love letter to Alaska, basically.
It is.
Yeah.
Yes.
And you talk quite a bit about how it is you came to Alaska. And you mentioned Glenn Gould as kind of cluing you into the idea, literally,
Yeah.
the idea of North,
Mhm.
and that North was a place to go. But having the notion of going north and then landing in Alaska are two very different things. So when you put that all together and you became an environmentalist,
Mhm.
which is very much of this book, when you first landed in Alaska, right, you had an idea. What was it that you found when you got there?
I did have an idea, or at least the idea of an idea. And what I found was I found my home, which I had never had. I found my people. I found my family, which I never felt that I had. And I found nothing less than the full shape and substance of my life's work. Karen, I can't imagine what might have become of me as a person or as an artist had I not somehow found Alaska. It made all the difference.
Okay, do you remember the first thing that you saw or heard that struck you as that moment, that time, or if there was one? I mean, I remember what it was for me. That's why I'm asking you.
I want to hear yours, but for me, it was just this series of epiphanies. Life was just one moment of grace after another. I mean, from the moment I first set foot in Juneau, this was 1975, and we flew into Juneau because we were going to take canoes across Admiralty Island, and we got our bags, and instead of going into town to whatever flop house we were going to stay in, we went directly to the Mendenhall Glacier.
Nice.
And as if I were shot from a cannon, I went straight up the West Ridge, and the air, the hermit thrushes and the Swainson's thrushes and the varied thrushes, hidden in the forest, those voices reverberating through that Sitka spruce western hemlock forest, and then I finally got up to the place where the trail broke out of the forest and onto the moraine, the lateral moraine of the Mendenhall Glacier, and there was this immensity of ice tumbling down off of the Juneau ice field, and that unfathomable cobalt blue of that ice. And I walked in the rocks all around me, the boulders of the moraine were dotted with these gorgeous stars of orange columbine. And I walked and I looked down and I heard wind chimes. And I thought, what is this? And I looked down into the depth of this crevasse, and I realized it was the sound of the melt.
Yeah.
Coming up out of the depths of the glacier. And at that moment I just thought, well, here I am. There is music here for me, and music that I could not discover anyplace else.
Well, you quote a John Haynes poem, as you referenced in your introduction. The book is dedicated in part to John, the late John Haynes, amazing poet. Could you read that excerpt from the poem, please, that you cite twice in the book, actually?
You want the excerpt, or you want the whole poem? It's short.
The excerpt. Okay.
Okay.
Because I think
Just
we
the
have
excerpt?
for Q&A. Yes, well, the part that you have in the for.
Well, look, because it speaks to your question. It speaks to that moment of epiphany and that idea that I had of North, which was it was profoundly shaped by the poems of John Haynes. It's a poem called "Listening in October" from his first volume, Winter News, and the final stanza is, "There are silences so deep, you can hear the journeys of the soul, enormous footsteps downward in a freezing earth." And that became a kind of touchstone, a kind of credo for my musical life.
Yeah. There, when I think of this notion of silence is so deep, and in the text you talk about how Gordon Wright, another one of the people you dedicate the book to, was kind of stumbling over that notion of deep, and why did you put that, in the front of one of your compositions? What was that about? And so I was thinking about, Marshall McLuhan's notion that we don't have earlids, we have eyelids. We can block out what we see. We can't block what we hear. And if we keep our ears open, we can hear those silences so deep. But it requires an awareness that many of us are dulled to. And part of the beauty of getting out in Alaska, out of Los Anchorage, whatever, but out where we lived and traveled, both of us, you hear things that you wouldn't hear. I mean, there are subtleties that, some of the land is like a moonscape, but the soundscape is also evocative of that sense of space. And your music is very much about space. And
yes,
and a creation of sonic space.
Yeah, it turns out that space may be the most fundamental compositional element of my music. Over the course of 40 some odd years now, I've followed the music through my own dim understanding of where it wanted to lead me. And it started with a kind of landscape painting in sound, and I've always been obsessed with this with place. And over the years, I've come to understand that that the music is not only about poetic, metaphorical ideas of place, but that it's actually about space. It's about the real world. It's about the air that we breathe and the earth beneath our feet. It's about the physical, sensate, volumetric space that we inhabit. It's about stopping, listening, paying attention to where we are. And for me, that's part of this lifelong search, this lifelong longing to feel more deeply at home somewhere on this earth.
Well, you had a pretty peripatetic childhood.
Yeah, I grew up all over the Eastern Seaboard. My dad was climbing the corporate ladder with the telephone company. Back when it was the telephone company, right? There was one. So it was like being in a military family. We moved every 2 or 3 years. Fortunately for my creative life, the most formative years were in the New York City area. Mm-hmm. So I was exposed early on to a lot of things that that I've drawn on for the rest of my life. But yeah, I didn't know where home was. People would talk about going home. I had no idea what they were talking about until I came home to Alaska. But then I had to leave Alaska ultimately, and so I think in a way, my whole life I've been trying somehow to compose home.
What does that have to do with the titles of your titles are very specific. What are you telling us?
Yeah, I'm torn about the titles, you know. I imagine the titles of my works as suggestions, hopefully gentle suggestions or invitations, not imperatives. Um, uh, I mean, I guess you could say that you could interpret "become ocean" as some sort of command, right?
Right.
But no, it was borrowed from a lovely Masastic poem that that John Cage wrote in honor of Lou Harrison on Lou's, I think it was his 70th birthday, spelling Lou Harrison down the middle, and it's a love song to Lou and to his music, and the poem ends with the line, "Listening to it, we become ocean." So I just love that idea of this world opening up and possibilities extending to the horizon and beyond. So when I decided to use that as a title, it was in that spirit, as an invitation, as a suggestion, but a gentle invitation to a listener. People will sometimes ask me, "So what ocean?" And my answer is always the same: your ocean. So with the titles, I'm trying to walk this razor's edge between too much information and clinical unfriendly titles.
Woo. Speaking of, if people have questions, they should ask them, and I will incorporate them in this conversation rather than wait.
Yeah, I'm ready for questions anytime. But just let me add a PS to that. The last thing that I want to do is limit a listener's imagination. I want to invite you in and then let you have your own experience, not the picture that I've painted for you or the story that I'm telling you, but but an experience of your own. That is, nothing makes me happier than when you hear something in the music that I had no idea was there.
Okay, well, that relates to something else in the book that I love. You talk about the edges, and you mention an Inuit hunter scanning the tundra for game will tell you that you learn the most by watching the edges.
Mm-hmm.
The edge. Okay. That for me really resonates because astronomers look for the edges. Artists look for the edges. When you're hunting, you look for the edges. You keep both
Absolutely.
when you hunt. You want to get the sight, the scope, but the other eye is open. When you're photographing, both eyes are open. When you're looking through a telescope, both eyes are open. And it's the edges that seem a lot of your music, and please set me straight if I'm saying something outside the edge here, is about the edge. It really is. It's about, you can't necessarily as a listener focus on one place at a time because there is so much happening.
That's the idea.
Okay.
Yeah, it's in that sense, it's like it is in my mind, it's like a place. There's always more happening in more different locations around you than you can possibly take in, which means if you come back to a piece, maybe you discover something new each time you listen. It is about the edges, but the edges with you at the center, because wherever you are truly listening, is the center. And so it's not about seeing the edges, it's very much about hearing the edges. Closing your eyes.
The works out.
I lost you there.
I lost you too. So I think we're both in glitchy spaces, folks. So this is going to happen.
Yeah, I'm on a satellite. Sorry.
From an undisclosed location far, far away.
Indeed.
Yeah. But glitches are part of it too, Yeah. So I wanted to ask about your change from being an environmentalist to devoting yourself to music. And you spend a lot of time in the book, a fair amount of real estate, talking about both at sometimes how the music is also environmental and how it's not. That there is sort of, you do.
Well, it's like it's beautiful and it's mathematical at the same time.
Right. Yeah, the yin and yang and the blah, blah,
Yeah.
blah, blah, blah. Okay, sorry. But also you disavow that there is any social activism or political intent in the music. And yet, because so much of it is about space and place, it is inevitably going to be.
Yeah, and I am in a sense talking out of both sides of my mouth at once. Maybe I should have stayed in politics, but I believe we can have it both ways. And Thoreau, in a sense, was a model for me of how an artist could retreat from the world and at the same time be deeply concerned with and involved with the major issues of the times. But when I made that decision to leave activism as my primary focus and rededicate myself to my art, I did so with the belief that in its own way, art and culture, music can matter every bit as much as activism and politics. And I've probably been trying to make good on that ever since. And I have to say, and I'm sure there are many people who will disagree with me, but I've come to believe in recent years that no, actually, art, culture, science ultimately matters more than politics, because these are the expressions of creative thought, which is the deepest part of what it means to be human. And if we look at the brief history of our species, virtually all the ideas come from creative thought. Art is about whatever it's about, the unknowable, the beautiful, like science, the asking of questions, but is emphatically not about power, which is the stock and trade of politics. I'm not disavowing it. I am more deeply concerned about the state of the world, like all of us, than I've ever been in my life. And when I sit in my studio and do my work, in my mind and in my heart, climate change, racial injustice, economic inequality, the litany that we could all rattle off, the litany of these daunting problems is with me. But I've chosen music. I've chosen art as my life. And if the music doesn't move you, doesn't speak to you, doesn't touch you in some way as music, then anything I might say about it, in a title, in a program note, in a conversation such as this one, means absolutely nothing. Well, so my first allegiance is to the art as art, and then everything else follows.
Because we are in a time when social activism is a form of art. And
I understand that. I really do.
And that is a whole other conversation that we do here. But there was a question about silence, and I just want to comment that before I introduce the question to you, that John Cage, when he was looking for silence, as many of us know, before he did 433, his famous piece where he opened the piano and sat there for 4 minutes and well, not he, but performer 4 minutes and 33 seconds, so the audience could hear themselves and hear the space, and before they started throwing tomatoes and such, not far from where I live now, in Woodstock. But he went into a hyperbaric chamber and found there is no silence, because he could hear himself. He could hear his bodily fluids moving around. So this person, it's an interesting thing. It says, your conception of silence seems to be an escape from non-essential distraction. Care to comment? I don't think I understand the question.
No, I think I do, and that's certainly, I guess, one part of my my conception of silence. That you might say is the prayer of silence. You know, the way that is it Zen, where they talk about the still quiet voice, or within, or the Quakers talk about, you know, greeting the light within. There is an aspect of my practice of art, it's as close to religion as I get. So there is a way in which I do understand silence as a form of prayer.
Okay.
But there's so much more to my understanding of, and my experience of silence. And as Cage taught us, there is no such thing as silence. And Cage also observed back in the 30s, you know, he said, most of what we hear around us most of the time is noise.
Because it's
sound.
sound.
And when we try to ignore it, it disturbs us. But when we open our ears and listen to it, we find that everything is fascinating. So there's this in my experience, and certainly this is true in what we call nature, in wild landscapes, where you're between noise and silence. I have a piece called "Strange and Sacred Noise,"
Yep.
And I have another piece called "In the White Silence." "In the White Silence" is a 75-minute piece for it's a love song to the Arctic. It's a 75-minute piece for strings and harp and percussion, within which there is not a millisecond of silence. And then there's "Strange and Sacred Noise," a concert-length work for percussion that contains within it several minutes of composed silence. So what's that about? Did I just get my titles crossed? I don't think so. I think noise, listening to noise and listening for silence lead us to the same conclusion, which is that the whole world is music, if we're listening.
Well, since you referenced Zen, there is a meditation practice of using sound as a support for the meditation. So that instead of trying to ignore it, you acknowledge it, and then you can let it go. And I think that's kind of fundamental also to what you're doing, because not all sound can be in one place, one composition, one space. There's all that stuff in audio and in film. You call it, you know, killing your babies. The stuff you have to get rid of, to leave behind. And so one of the questions here has to do about the character of space of the lands you work from. And I think part of that, and when you answer this question, you can please address this, is that not all spaces and places can be accommodated. Because as you said, your work isn't narrative. It's not a story that you're telling. It's a sense. Am I paraphrasing you at all accurately?
No, I'm not objecting.
You would, I know you would. So that's
What are friends for?
Especially this long. But okay, so I don't know if that answers the question about the character of the space of the lands you work from.
Well, I'm not quite sure what to say, but you know, I left Alaska because I wanted to experience new places. I wanted to hear things that I hadn't heard before, which is what I'm always after in music. I'm really not, although I think there's a pretty clear progression over the years throughout the body of work. I'm not really interested in repeating anything. It's all about discovery for me. It's about hearing something that I haven't heard before. It's about curiosity and following my ears to wherever the music may want to lead me next. So it's true that by temperament or aesthetic inclination or whatever it may be, I've been drawn to a certain kind of landscape or space. But I'm not finished yet, and
I hope not.
you know, I like openness. I like big spaces, but something tells me that that there's going to be a time when more intimate spaces will come in. I mean, I'm writing string quartets now.
Romantic.
If you told the the 20-something-year-old JLA that he'd be writing string quartets, he would have snarled at you. But I'm starting to learn about a different way of being present, a more intimate immensity, if you will.
Well, you referenced how important jazz was for you.
Yeah.
And many of the musicians that you reference, of course, experimented with different constellations of musicians.
Yeah, exactly.
So that makes sense.
Yeah, well, I mean, you don't dedicate your life to music. I mean, maybe you do if you're in the commercial world, but you don't dedicate your life to music if you're just trying to get a product out into the world and make money or become famous. Music is worthy of a life's devotion because it always knows more than you do, and there's always something new to learn, to hear, to discover.
So have you done your Love Supreme?
I don't think I have. I don't think I've gotten to that level of musical consciousness yet. But there's still time.
Plenty. Because this refers, I think, back to this question of space and place. Your composition, Earth and the Great Weather, one of a number that draws on indigenous music as source and speech, language, and we're in a time when to do that, to use work that directly derives from another culture is considered delicate and questionable.
I've always felt that way, for decades.
So when you approach, say, James Nariak or Adeline Raboff or Doreen Simmons to work with you, what was the response?
One of the, as you well know, Karen, one of the wonderful things about living in Alaska is the presence of all those vibrant native cultures and all the opportunities to learn from the wisdom, the traditions of people who've lived in the North for longer than anyone can remember. And I was fortunate in my life in Alaska to have many native friends and to learn from native people all over Alaska. I mean, I've gone crabbing on the Bering Sea ice with a Yupik elder and shared dried salmon and seal meat on the Kobuk River with Nunavut friends, and taken steam baths in the Aleutians with Aleut friends. And I was fortunate in my first years in Alaska. I I was timpanist and principal percussionist in the Arctic Chamber Orchestra, the touring ensemble that my dear friend Gordon Wright founded. And in those days, twice a year, spring and fall, the orchestra would go on tour. And the tour was always to rural Alaska, to the bush, to the villages. So I was fortunate early on to have those experiences of sharing music and stories with people in the villages and all these different cultural traditions. So we go into a village, play our concert of European classical music, have a potlatch with everyone in town, and then enjoy performances by the village dance group before we rolled out our sleeping bags and slept on the floor in the gymnasium.
Like,
So it just seemed natural, to work with my friends and neighbors, with James Nariak and Dorian Simmons, who are Inupiat, and with Lincoln Tritt and Adeline Peter Raboff, who are Gwich'in Athabascan. And it was my honor that in 1993, I guess it was, we premiered this evening-length piece called Earth and the Great Weather, which was actually commissioned by the Alaska Festival of Native Arts. And it was a celebration of the Arctic, more specifically the northeast corner of Alaska, the territory that we now call the Arctic National Wildlife Refuge. And of course, that's the homeland of both the Gwich'in people who live in the forest on the south side of the Brooks Range, and the Inupiat people who live on the north side of the Brooks Range and the Arctic coast. And so my idea was to bring those two cultures together in this landscape, and my own, Western cultural experience and perspective, in search of an idea that I called sonic geography. Barry Lopez once observed that landscape is the culture that contains all human cultures. And I just love the idea that, we were all now living in or around the same territory. And what would the music sound like? The music of these three different cultural traditions and the music of the earth in that geography. It's a long answer, but it was a very important moment in my creative life, to have the experience of learning from my native friends and learning to speak a little bit, a few words in their native tongues, and then I moved on because I was not entirely comfortable. Even back then, I felt like, well, no, really, my work isn't acculturation. It's not. The way I have always viewed my work is as a search for. I've tried to draw my music directly from the earth, outside of the bounds of culture, my own or anyone else's, which is, patently ridiculous proposition. It's not possible. But I think it's served me well. And ultimately, Karen, I feel like what I'm doing now as I get older is I'm trying to leave something in music that may be useful to the next generations who are going to have to imagine and bring about a new culture, a new way of being on this earth, and try to fix the mess that our generation is leaving them. So ultimately, for me, music, I imagine music as either outside of my own culture or culture altogether, or music in search of a new culture that I'll never live to inhabit. Pretty highfalutin, but I stand by it.
Well, you talk about being beyond culture. I don't think that you use the word beyond, but apart from culture, while acknowledging that's possible. But in that light, when I asked Adeline Raboff about how she felt now, this many years later, and I asked Doreen Simmons the same thing, and Doreen, I knew Doreen's dad when I lived in Barrow in Kiaravik, so it was a lot of fun to connect with her and talk about that.
She's such a lovely woman.
But what Adeline said was there was no problem because your culture was composer. And that's just such a wonderful way of, very generous and expansive.
Oh, well, and so typical too of Adeline and of of my experience of you know, the generosity of spirit of Alaska Native traditions.
Well, somebody has a question here. I see we're almost out of time, and
Okay.
they though we could keep going for a few days, I think. They asked if you could talk more about why you left Alaska.
Oh, you know, it was it is the question, and I do address it probably in the book probably more um, eloquently than I can do now. But um, it was a combination of things, but it was a change in um, it was a change in my own. I got older. My eyes went bad. The winter darkness became more difficult. But also my two best friends died. And John Haynes and Gordon Wright were in many ways the personification of Alaska, at least my vision of Alaska. At the same time, the social and the political life of Alaska took on a much more hard-bitten tone, and the sense of openness and possibility that we had felt when we were young in Alaska just didn't feel the same. It became undeniable to me that that Alaska is a colony of big oil, and ultimately, I think Cynthia and I made the excruciating decision to leave because we thought, okay, let's have one more grand adventure before while we still can, you know. So since leaving Alaska, we've been walkabout. We've lived in Mexico, we lived in Chile, now we're living here in the Chihuahuan Desert, and so it was a combination of things. But you know, I say in the book, and I mean this, that Alaska is still Alaska, and any sense of failure that I may have felt in leaving Alaska ultimately was a failure of my own imagination.
Well, you know, Samuel Beckett wrote a wonderful radio play, actually, that Mabu Mines years back turned into a performance at Worcester Garage, at the Performing Garage. And one line in it is, "Imagination dead, imagine."
I can't. It's kind of all I got. I'm completely unemployable. I have no marketable skills.
Tell me about it. Yeah, well, there we go. There's a question here that about time, and I think we're probably about to get the hook here. And of course, in this pandemonium time, time is a very different element. And I'm going to try and ask this question with a straight face, because I think about time and the different time space continuums constantly. But this person wants to know, is time coming or going for you?
I love the question. And, you know, Grinnemans in Parsifal, here time has turned into space. The Book of Revelation, or Samuel Beckett, time has turned into space and there will be no more time. Time is coming, time is going, but what I really want is to be in time undisturbed. I want to be right here, right now, in the moment. And for me, music is the most powerful way of being here.
Be here now. People don't have to know about our emails where we quote different things. Anyway, our folks out there at Town Hall, is this a wrap, or are we keeping on going? I just need to know. Hello? Because I think we have answered all of the, well, maybe we're not. Is it possible? Well, no, here's a question. It's somebody talking about the natural world and how beautiful it is in Seattle and all of the natural catastrophes. Hi, Candace. Is it okay if I ask this one more question?
Oh, totally.
Thank you. Okay. Is it possible to write music about nature or connected to nature without it being a threnody, being music or mourning?
Anymore, I'm not sure. I do notice a change recently in my music. It is becoming darker. How could it not? I'm currently working on a piece called Vespers of the Anthropocene, the central movement of which is litanies of the Sixth Extinction. And the text is entirely in Latin, not liturgical Latin, but scientific Latin. The scientific names of 192 critically endangered plant and animal species, ending with, of course, Homo sapiens. We're living in very dark and uncertain times. We're already in the early stages of the next mass extinction. And yet, even as the music embraces that and addresses it, I hope it's becoming like the coffee I drink in the morning with my espresso cortado, dark but not bitter. Because what keeps me going to my studio every day is my love for and my faith in young people who I will never know, and all I'm trying to do is leave something that may be useful to them as an expression of grief, or as a solace, or perhaps as some sort of inspiration to the work that lies ahead of them. And I love them dearly, and I wish them all the best of luck.
I think it's going to take more than luck to get through the next bunch of time.
It's going to take a lot of creativity, a lot of courage, but I am heartened, and I'm talking now about the Greta Thunberg generation. I'm talking about teens, 20s, and yes, 30-somethings. I'm talking about from my old geezer's perspective, the kids. I believe in the kids. And they've got their work cut out for them, but I think they can do it, and I'm just hoping to leave some breadcrumbs along the way for them.
And they have some of them have to be gluten-free though. So, okay, so I think that's kind of a benediction. That's a way to end and to look forward. And John, it's really been fun. Thank you.
As always, Karen. We should just let everybody else go, and we'll keep going.
But this has really been great. So thank you for spending this time and sharing not the words, but the heart behind the words with this audience.
Thank you, Karen.
Yeah, and I want to thank both of you for this conversation tonight. It's always really nice to hear two friends talking about, the everlasting questions of like, what is our purpose here, and how do we find our place? I love thinking about that. So thank you both so much. And I want to thank our audience too for coming out tonight and participating in this event. If you want to follow more of what is coming up for Town Hall, you can follow this Crowdcast channel by clicking the follow button in the top right corner. You can also look online on our calendar. I want to encourage you to purchase a copy of John's book through the Buy the Book button here on Crowdcast, or the link on the YouTube stream. That's going to take you right over to Elliott Bay, where you can purchase locally. So thank you both so much again. I hope that you stay safe and healthy and have a great evening.
Thank you.